AITUC has taken a very clear stand right from the beginning about the difficulties faced by the working class and the poor and the particularly the migrant workers, and through its various organizations has tried its best to help people all over the country. But every day new narratives are being built up, new stories are being created, more confusions are being created, and more and more repressive agenda is coming to the fore, putting people into a lot of difficulties and lot of confusion. And we are seeing that all through the country people have lost their voice, and the progressive forces, which include some of the leftist forces, have it may be appear some of you may not like what I'm saying, but I personally feel that we should have done better and we should have been more vocal in voicing the concerns and difficulties of the people, because I have always believed and I have always seen how all the stalwarts of the CPI and the AITUC, be it my own father or Comrade M.S. Krishnan or the present generation of leaders like Comrade Amarjit Kaur, throughout their life, they have been very studious and they have been very scholarly, and with all their knowledge, which they have tried to impart it to the common people who cannot understand the nuances of what is going on around them. But somehow, barring few leaders like Comrade Amarjit Kaur, uh, I think there has been a big lacuna in reaching out to the people, explaining what is happening. So in that direction, this webinar also, I'm sure, would be helping everybody. So I'll contribute to whatever extent possible. From my side, myself and my better half, Dr. Bala Saraswati, have been following this epidemic or pandemic very, very closely since its beginning in December in China and later from March in India. So whatever I'm going to say in the next few minutes is based on all the scientific evidence that we have been following up over the past 1.5 years, on which we have also written a book in Kannada, which people in Karnataka are very well aware of, published by Navakarnataka Publications, called Corona Hedaradironah, translated Don't Fear Corona or Don't Be Afraid of Corona. That was on August 15th last year. It's almost 1 year. Most of the facts that we had mentioned in that book have come true and are relevant even today. So I will show you a few slides, but I won't explain many of the things because you are all aware of the basic facts of COVID. So when I show these slides, it will rekindle the memories that you have now. So my whole intention is to tell from my point of view, or from our point of view, what we should have done and what we should be doing in the next few months that this infection is going to be with us in the name of third wave, fourth wave, or whatever. So I'll be speaking on these four subsections, basically. How do we help COVID-19 patients in the days to come? What has been our approach and what should be our approach to lockdowns in case it is going to happen again? What's our response to the narrative that is now being built up of third wave, Delta, Delta plus, etc., etc.? So we should foresee a lot of things that would come in our way in the next few weeks. So how we should respond to it? And the most important, I feel at this juncture, is a clarity, and we should have a firm decision on how to respond to this new narrative of vaccination that is being trumpeted. Now, COVID, I'll be very brief on this. COVID, as we all know, originated in China. The debate is still on whether it is a natural virus or a laboratory-made virus. But as of now, it appears to be a natural virus because we see the other similar viruses, the SARS-CoV-1 of 2002 or the MERS of 2012. This also has similar origins, supposedly from the bats and through the pangolins or other wild animals. It must have passed on to the human beings, who even today, being a hunter-gatherer right from the evolutionary days, some of us don't leave that habit of hunting and gathering food. So some of them who went into the caves in China would have caught the infection from the caves and the bats or these animals, and then spread it to their fellow human beings in the society. And from then on, in the jet age that we are living in, within 2 to 3 months, it spreads to almost all 200 countries of the world. And it can infect animals also, it can infect birds also. So it's a very ubiquitous virus. And it's nothing new. There are 7 coronaviruses, including this one. The 4 of them are very, very mild. SARS-CoV-1 is what causes the primarily infection of the lung. MERS also causes infection of the lung. Because they do not cause much infection in the upper respiratory tract, they are not as easily transmissible as SARS-CoV-2. So therefore, although the deaths were much more, 10 to 12% in SARS-CoV-1 and 30% in MERS, in SARS-CoV-2, mortality is much, much lesser compared to the other two, but it has spread much faster because it basically infects the upper airways. So with just coughing and sneezing or talking to each other, the virus can spread. So the mode of transmission of this virus is man-to-man communication, talking to each other. So particularly when we talk for more than 10 minutes at a very close distance and talking loudly or singing or speaking aloud at very close distance, that's how it spreads. All the other modalities of spread have now been discounted, that they may not play a very major role. So essentially it is person to person talking which results in spread of this infection. CDC has made it very clear that the current evidence strongly suggests that transmission from contaminated surfaces does not contribute substantially to new infections. So it's basically through the air from person to person. So these are the symptoms: fever, cough, but most of them invariably have headache. So I would say anyone with symptoms starting with a mild headache, which can be little more moderately severe on the second or third day, all around the head. That's what we commonly see, followed by mild fever. I've seen so many cases of COVID now in the last 1 year, 3 to 4 months. Fever is 100, 101, hardly it goes above 102. So very mild or moderate grade of fever. And some of them have sore throat and mild cough, but very few of them, 10 to 12, may have severe cough lasting for 1 or 2 weeks. But otherwise, cough is also not very severe. And so these are the, and 12% will have diarrhea, but very characteristically about 95% of the patients will have a loss of smell, which generally happens on the second, third or the fourth day and can last for about 10 to 15 days. Invariably, almost all of the infected persons will get back their smell. So nothing to even, it's not a matter of concern. Everybody will get back the smell. So anyone having headache, fever, mild cough and sore throat and loss of smell should consider himself or herself as having COVID. Now, the disease called COVID can be divided into 2 phases. The first phase is in the first week, and the second phase is in the second week or thereafter. In 99% of the patients, or the majority of the patients, body's immune system itself will tackle the virus, will prevent the virus from spreading further to the other organs. So in almost everybody, body's immune system itself is capable of containing and controlling this infection. And this happens within 1 week. So in majority of patients, 70 to 80%, some studies say up to 90%, and particularly in children, there may not be even any symptoms. That means the virus will enter the upper airways, then the body's immune system will detect this virus and will destroy it in no time. So they will not even realize that they have had the infection. And so how do we know that they have had infection? The studies where the new gadget that the new method that we are using, even without symptoms, we have been doing this RT-PCR test and poking everybody's nose and throat. And that's how we have found that majority of the patients who turned positive on RT-PCR had no symptoms. So in majority of cases, the infection is very mild or no symptoms, particularly in the younger age group. And even in those who have symptoms, 70 to 80% will have a very mild illness. In 3 to 4 days, body's immune system itself will tackle the virus and completely clear the infection. But in a very few patients, I said 1% or lesser, the immune system itself goes wrong. So we should remember that the complications that we see in COVID are not as much due to the virus itself, but due to our own immune system going wrong. So what is called as dysregulated immune response, that is what is depicted in this very beautifully depicted image, that in patients who have a very high viral load, particularly the healthcare workers, patients who are elderly, and people who have comorbidities like diabetes, high blood pressure, obesity. Obesity is a very important comorbidity, particularly in the younger age group. This has now been shown in one large study published in Lancet that in the younger age group, even body mass index of 23, that is, they cannot be called obese. They are barely overweight or in the upper limit of normal. That itself could aggravate the problem because of immune dysregulation. I'll tell you more about it a little later. So in these patients where the immune system now goes haywire, instead of just controlling the infection and stopping with that, the immune system goes on attacking the virus, and in the process, there is a collateral damage to our lungs and our blood clotting mechanism and the blood vessels. That is what leads to complications in the lung and vascular problems like stroke and heart attacks can happen, and thromboembolic phenomena in the lungs. So this happens, as I said, in very few, maybe 1% or lesser. So the number of patients who get admitted in the intensive care unit is estimated to be throughout the world. In most of the countries, the data is now available over the last 1 year, is about 3 to 4 per thousand. And about 30% of them, of these 3 to 4 per thousand, would land up in ventilation, artificial ventilation. And of those who need ventilation, about 30 to 40% would succumb and may not recover. Now, we had, myself and my better half, Dr. Balasar, so they had analyzed the mortality statistics last April itself. And this is what we had posted to our friends and in some of our professionals groups on April 8th of last year, that what we found that 8.5, anyway, I won't go on to the left side of it, but the conclusion, I would say, the common factor for increased risk of severe COVID-19 is the presence of the so-called metabolic syndrome at any age, old or young. See, this we wrote on April 8th. And at that point of time, there were not many papers or studies published in the journals that we generally read. So this was our own observation based on the data from India, Italy, UK, US, and China. These disorders are related to consumption of sugars and sweets, fruit juices, sweetened beverages, processed and fast foods, fried foods, etc., and also alcohol consumption and smoking. Avoiding these will be helpful in combating COVID-19. COVID-19 remains a mild illness in almost 80 to 90% of those infected, and many patients lesser than 30 years of age are likely to have very mild or no symptoms. So we are drawn attention to the fact that COVID complications are directly related to what we call as metabolic syndrome. And then later on, there are a lot of other papers published. So I'm just giving a bird's eye view of this particular aspect. This is very, very important. This will help you personally if you have not already gone through COVID. It will help your family members. Believe me, this is all based on the most recent and the best of studies and reports that we have gathered from the best of journals. So we have called it as a triad of a new virus joining with the new food and the new lifestyle. Now, unfortunately, when I say this, the lockdowns that we have done have added to the consumption of new food and have added to the new lifestyle of being very sedentary without exercise. So the lockdowns have worsened this. That would have been one of the reasons for the worsening of mortality and morbidity in the second wave. And there are papers suggesting that too. So how does the new food worsen the disease? It causes insulin resistance, that it increases insulin in the body because all the sugars and fruits and maida release a lot of insulin, and all this insulin hyperactivity leads to insulin resistance, which ends up in obesity, diabetes, hypertension, heart disease, etc. And this in turn increases inflammatory processes. And as a counter to this, a receptor called ACE2 increases in number in these patients. The virus actually attaches itself to this receptor. So you just imagine these patients have a lot of doors in their body as a measure to or as a method that the body has found to protect itself against diabetes and insulin resistance. But the virus chooses to attach itself to these doors, and so it finds more doors to enter the system. and then it shuts these doors. So what happens in the process is that people with all these problems have more viral load, and the virus shuts off the protective mechanism. That leads to deterioration of their primary conditions, which I mentioned now, and which in turn, in a vicious cycle, worsens their COVID also. How does the new lifestyle worsen COVID? Lack of physical activity and lack of sleep increases insulin resistance, in turn increases inflammatory processes and disturbs the immune function. So this I've already, so new coronavirus mingles with these two and causes, the havoc. So we need to, if we have to win over COVID when we get it, or when our friends or when our colleagues or whoever gets it, we have to break this triad. Change the food, change the lifestyle, we can win COVID very easily. So how do I recommend? What is my recommendation? And my better half, we together formulated this strategy last April itself. So what is that? Patients with the headache, loss of smell, loss of taste, cough, fever, body ache, sore throat, diarrhea, this I've told you, these are the symptoms of COVID. Anybody with these symptoms should be asked to stay at home. That is very important. In fact, in March, when I wrote about it, I was laughed at, jeered at, ridiculed, and called all sorts of things. But within a week, the government of India itself came out with the suggestion that people should stay at home, and then they created the helplines for that purpose. But by then, out of the media frenzy that was created, that it is such a serious illness that people refused to follow these instructions. So they, instead of staying at home, they were asked to come for particularly in Karnataka. The so-called committee that we had invited people to come and get tested. So instead of staying home, they all went outside, got in the name of getting tested with RT-PCR. And with the RT-PCR test, even if it is positive, we are not going to treat or give any medicine. So it was a waste of effort. But anyway, we won't go into those details. So in this process of getting tested and going to hospitals and clinics, they mingled with people, and that would have helped in spread of the infection. So Italian doctors had written about it in the third week of March, that don't do the mistake that we did in Italy. People who have the symptoms should stay home and then contact their health services. And that's exactly what was done in UK under the NHS, that people were asked to stay at home. And if you recollect, their Prime Minister Boris Johnson stayed home for 10 days at 10 Downing Street. And only when he deteriorated, the event hypoxic, he was shifted to the hospital. So that's what we should have told our people. Anyway, now, if anybody has these symptoms, message is to stay home and monitor yourself. That's very important. Take paracetamol only if the fever is very high. I told you, in most patients, fever is not very high, 100, 101. Let the fever be there. The fever itself will kill the virus. It is the body's immune response that is trying to tackle the virus. So let the fever be there. If it is very high, causes discomfort or headache, then you can take paracetamol. But definitely not to take any painkillers, what we call as non-steroidal anti-inflammatory, like ibuprofen, diclofenac, and all those things should be avoided. Keep a distance of 6 feet from family members and others to prevent the infection from spreading from the infected person to the uninfected person. The infected ones with symptoms should cover their face while coughing and sneezing. And then they should importantly wash their hands. Even though the chances of transmission is very less, the ones who are infected, because they would be rubbing their face and nose, their hands may be contaminated. So it is better that they wash their hands with soap and water. And then at least during the second week, they should start checking their oxygen saturation with a very simple device called a pulse oximeter. Now this device will tell you in the larger fonts, it will show you the oxygen saturation. I'll show you that a little while later. And it will also show you the pulse rate. Normal saturation is 97 to 100%. If it starts dropping below 95, that's a warning sign. So when it starts dropping below 95, the pulse rate proportionately goes up beyond 100. So if that happens, that is the time when you have to alert the doctors. Now this generally happens during the second week. Now this is another mistake that is commonly being committed everywhere, even by my own colleagues and in some hospitals. What they do, they watch the patient for 1 week and then they say, okay, you go home. Nothing happened during the first week. Most of the complications happen during the second week and onwards. So the mean time of getting admitted to the hospital is 11th or 12th day. Even today, I have a patient with leukemia who has got admitted on the 12th day of the illness. On the 6th day, he was asked to go home from a hospital, and he lands up in another hospital today on the 12th day under my care with severe COVID. So that should not happen, because the vulnerable, I told you, who are the people who are likely to develop complications, they should be monitored very carefully during the second week. And if there are any signs of oxygen going down or symptoms worsening, they should be immediately, you should be contacting the doctors, and if needed, they should be admitted. So I mentioned here, factor age above 60, blood pressure, high blood pressure, type 2 diabetes, coronary artery disease, obesity, liver or kidney failure, and blood cancers are risk factors for severe COVID. So 5 to 6 days after onset, if symptoms improve, SpO2 is above 95, it is likely that the patient is recovering. Stay home for a total about a week or 3 days without fever. And after that, they can go out, because the risk of transmission is very, very less after 3 days of being afebrile or after 7 days. So they can move about and take all the care to prevent transmission to others. Not much of treatment required. But if the fever and other symptoms continue to worsen, cough worsens, breathing difficulty starts. In fact, some of the patients may not find breathing difficulty, only their oxygen will dip below 95. So they should be very, very careful on this. They should not ignore that, okay, I don't have breathlessness, so I'm okay. No, if the oxygen is less than 95, you should see a doctor. Tiredness, confusion, reduction in oxygen, I've already told you. All these indicate worsening of COVID. Immediately contact the doctor or a specialist and get admitted to the hospital at the earliest. It is not when your oxygen goes down to 80 that you should go to a hospital. You should go to the hospital when your oxygen is less than 95, say 93, 92 or less than that. Earlier someone gets admitted and starts on oxygen, so much rest is given to the lung, and the prevention, the worsening of the problem can be prevented. Because when the oxygen goes down, the brain senses that the body is not getting the oxygen. It tells the lung to work more. So the lungs will have to work more. The pulse rate will go up, which I already told you. As the lungs work more, they get tired and the problem worsens. So that's to prevent that, get admitted early, start taking oxygen to prevent the further complications. Many of our comrades and friends and organizations, these are from Team Kanaya, helping people. You can see they're checking with their pulse oximeter. The volunteers are doing that and giving them the essentials that they need, right? So all these from Begusarai. I'm sure many other teams from our side and from a lot of other organizations also are doing this. As Ramarjit Kaur said and Vijay Bhaskar said, the government has been a letdown. There has been, mobile units could have been done by the government, which I had written to them on March 22nd last year, that you should ask people to stay home, create mobile units with ASHA workers and other doctors and paramedics. They should go home, visit these people, check their oxygen levels, keep them comfortable, give them confidence. That should have been done by the government. Now the responsibility has been taken over by common people in the interest of their families and their people around. So this is the pulse oximeter. This is how it shows 95 and pulse rate 90. If it starts dropping below 95, then the pulse will go up proportionately to 100 or above. Now, sometimes these pulse oximeters can give faulty readings. I keep getting called, sir, my pulse oximeter is showing 90, 85, but I'm okay. What to do? Now, asking them to buy one more pulse oximeter or looking for another pulse oximeter is a little difficult. So I suggest that you all should know how to check your pulse. Now, why I'm making this statement that you all should know how to check your pulse? I'm a little shocked and saddened to know. Even yesterday, I had about 4 youngsters in their teens, 17, 18, 19. One of them had cough and fever. So I had to see her. And I asked them, same problem was there. So pulse oximeter showing 88 and she got panicky and she came to the hospital. She was absolutely okay. Her grandfather also had COVID. He's also doing great. So then I asked them, do you know how to check the pulse? All of them said, no, we don't know how to check the pulse. When we were going to school in the 70s and 80s, now it appears to be long, long ago, our physical education teacher taught each one of us about CPRs and about how to help a person who falls down with epileptic fit and how to check the pulse. I'm surprised that our youngsters do not even know how to check the pulse. So that's why I put this image don't feel otherwise. This is how the pulse is checked. No, just beneath the thumb, you keep your 2 fingers here, two or ideally 3 fingers, but anyway, 2 also would work. This is how you do it. Check the pulse. So even if the pulse oximeter say shows 85, 90, and if the pulse rate is normal, when you feel it on the pulse, it is normal, don't get panicky. Maybe it is a technical problem, right? So it's very important that all of us should know how to examine the pulse. Now, what is the treatment for COVID? We had complete chaos and confusion as far as treatment of COVID is concerned in India compared to the rest of the world. Rest of the world, when I say all countries of the world except India, the WHO, the CDC, the FDA, of course, FDA gave emergency use authorization to some drugs, but immediately when they realized they don't work, they withdrew. On March 15th, Karnataka government issued a new treatment protocol. And on the same day, we had written about the methodology. I told you the flow chart. I just showed you how to manage. Same thing I had published on May 15th. And then on May 23rd, I issued a press statement seeking withdrawal of the protocol announced by the Karnataka government and the Rajiv Gandhi University. This particular protocol, I'll show you a little later, included each and every drug available under the sun, antibiotics, paracetamol, and so many other drugs to be given to these patients, and listed a whole battery of investigations for everybody, asymptomatic to severe. That is why I issued a press statement seeking the withdrawal of the protocol, stating that this will result in confusion and everybody will be subjected to these investigations which are unnecessary, will be given these drugs which are unnecessary and harmful. So please withdraw. But none of the medical organizations supported, none of them raised this topic. In fact, whatever I had feared happened. The same faulty treatment protocol became the norm, at least in Karnataka. Similar treatment protocols were issued by almost all the states in the later days. Then in September, we started seeing few deaths, unfortunate deaths, possibly due to the side effects of the drugs. So me and my better half, Dr. Balasaraswat, we wrote one more article about the possible drug interactions between chloroquine, azithromycin, domperidone, and such others, which could cause cardiac arrhythmias and sudden deaths. So from our side, we have tried to do the best that we could do. Now, this is what I told you about, the confusion. The one on the left-hand side, the yellow one, is what was published by ICMR very recently in May, which included ivermectin, which again included chloroquine, which included inhalation of budesonide. And before this, they kept changing the protocols every now and then. But this was the latest and probably the worst, that they also included chloroquine and ivermectin when nowhere in the world these were recommended. And this is the Karnataka protocol, which included ivermectin, favipiravir, vitamin C, zinc. Few days before this, April 22nd, once ICMR brought out this, they on May 1st or so, I think I don't get the date now, they changed once again within a week. So this is how we have been doing. And look at these treatment bills that were the pamphlets that were distributed by the civic authorities and even a medical college hospital to the people. This is Bangalore Municipal Corporation for home isolated patients recommending steroid tablet. This is another Megon Hospital in Shivamogga, prednisolone tablets. This is a private practitioner prescription Medrol, that is again a steroid. These are some of the scribbled prescriptions from government and private hospitals. Now this one circled here is azithromycin with domperidone. I told you both these can together cause a cardiac arrhythmia. This is vitamin C, anti-flu. Anti-flu is oseltamivir. The company manufacturing oseltamivir came out and stated very openly in April last year that this doesn't work for COVID. But we continue to use it all these years. 1.5 years we have used this. Vitamin C and zinc. Finally, on May 7th, I wrote one more piece in English, and it was published by the Newsman, that India has a multitude of COVID-19 treatment guidelines and is causing chaos. And in this, I quoted WHO, I quoted America's National Institute of NIH Paul Treatment Protocol, UK NHS protocol, and our own neighbors, Pakistan, Bangladesh, and Sri Lanka's protocols. And I wrote there that it's only in India that evidence-based uniform treatment protocols has not been published. There are a lot of confusion. And in addition to that, we have been openly promoting Chawanaprash, Kashaya, Kwada, turmeric milk by even top level members of Niti Aayog, who at one time were very well known as scientists of repute. They also promoted yoga and Kashaya and Kwada. All this caused all kinds of confusion. Now, this is the recommendation in the American National Institute of Health. What is that? No sufficient data to recommend anything for the mild cases of COVID. So they said no steroids, no other drug. And finally, on 27th of May, the Director General of Health Services, central government, came out with a new protocol wherein they also said nothing for patients with the mild or asymptomatic disease, no antibiotic, no antibacterial, no antiviral, no steroid, nothing. Stop everything. That means since March last year until May 27 this year, all governments in India, state and center, recommended several medicines, which finally they say were of no use, don't use them. So you see this chart from the same booklet released by the DGHS. Asymptomatic, no medicines. Mild, no medicines. Moderate, not many medicines except steroids. Severe, everything you should do, but medicine, drug-wise, only anticoagulation and steroids. Nothing else. So essentially, so you can see it again. I've listed it in bolder letters. Chloroquine, azithromycin, ivermectin, doxycycline, oseltamivir, favipiravir, colchicine, steroids. No. Paracetamol is the only one if there is fever. But as I told you in the beginning, majority of patients with COVID will recover on their own with the help of their immune system without any medicines. Nothing is needed. Nothing will help. Only paracetamol, that too if the fever is very high. And none of these also being marketed in the name of immunity boosters. We don't need any immunity boosters. Our body is capable of handling everything. Otherwise, we won't survive for decades. But let us not spoil the immune system by the new food and the new lifestyle which I mentioned about. That's what dysregulates the immune system. If you don't do that, if you change your food and lifestyle, there is no need for any immune booster. So zinc, vitamin C, coronil, Chawanaprash, Kashaya, Kwada, turmeric milk, homeopathy, yoga, none of these would help immunity boosters. Don't rely on them. Don't use them. So this is what you need to do. For the same chart I told you. So how to now convert it into treatment options. Stop eating sugar, sweets, soft drinks, jaggery, honey, fruits, fruit juices, maida, bread, biscuits, noodles, etc. All this. So that will take care of the new food as a problem. Exercise regularly, at least 30 minutes a day, and sleep for 7 to 8 hours. So that will take care of this new lifestyle that we are following, which is bad on the immune system and on insulin resistance. And of course, to take care of the virus, follow the protective measures, particularly maintaining the physical distance. So this is the message that we should give to our people. No, their food should comprise of whole grains, fish and all the non-vegetarian food. They're all very good bodybuilding foods, and lots of vegetables, and if possible, nuts like almonds and cashew and all this. Maybe a little expensive, but whatever it is, avoiding the modern food and the modern lifestyle is most important in strengthening the immune system. This is the reason why now there are several reports from within the country that people of lower social, economic, and educational strata have done very well facing COVID. The mortality and morbidity has been very minimal in that social, economical, and educational age group, because they don't rely on these kind of foods, and they're always very active, hardworking, under the sun, which also give them vitamin D. So now with the lockdowns, we have forced people to eat this modern food, and we have forced people to stay home, and they have lost their exercise. There has been a paper in the British Journal of Sports Medicine which pointed out that fact, that lockdowns have had a very adverse impact on the exercise and other parameters which I told. So if the patient is hospitalized, requires oxygen, then only then under medical supervision, we may have to use dexamethasone or steroid, and we will use in most of them low molecular weight heparin as prophylaxis or treatment. Remdesivir has also lost favor. Now you would have read report, even courts intervened regarding remdesivir. Suddenly it has gone off the radar. In fact, in our book that I mentioned, we had written in August that it's of no use. Later in the solidarity trial of WHO very clearly said that it recommends against the use of remdesivir. But it had to be May 27th for Government of India to clearly say that remdesivir is of no use. Now this is about the CT scans. A lot of people have got 3 times, 4 times CT scans on them. That is because initial days, as I told you, state governments recommended CT scan. Some doctors went to the extent of saying if RT-PCR negative, only CT scans repeatedly should be done. But finally, in the May 27th protocol, we very clearly mentioned, at least in the DGHS thing, that it should be done only if there is worsening or no other option. But look at this Karnataka government, ECG, X-ray, and the HRCT, if available. Not if needed or if nothing else is available. But if CT is available, do the CT. This again Karnataka, HRCT, thorax for everybody. Now this is the guidance of American CDC and the American Radiological Association, very clearly suggesting that CT scan should not be used routinely. It will lead to overdiagnosis and wrong or over treatment. So don't do it. That is the recommendation. Now, when you do it, this is also All India Institute of Medical Sciences, our own, saying CT scan should be used very, very sparingly. Again, they quote American College of Radiology. So the exposure to radiation with our natural life from all over the sunlight and all our surroundings also have radiation. So it's about 3 ms per year. Now chest X-ray in comparison is 0.1 ms, but chest CT is 7 to 10 ms. So I'm just highlighting how one CT scan exposes you to so much more radiation and it's not necessary. I'm just showing you 2 cases who I managed without anything other than steroids and low molecular weight heparin. And of course, the diet that which I advise to everybody. Look at these X-rays. This is a male, 63 years, admitted on day 9. I told you this is the time they get admitted, 9, 10 or 11. See the X-rays here. I'm sure you can make out. May 9, this is day 13. Already it is clearing. And I get only CRP and LDH. CRP indicates inflammation. LDH indicates lung injury or tissue injury. It was 285 and 443 on day 9. On day 13, it is 47 CRP, LDH 293. And see the X-ray already clearing up. 17 is the day I discharged him from hospital because he was maintaining at 99% oxygen in the room air. Few shadows you can see here. But since he was absolutely okay, I sent him home. Day 32, I asked him to come back for a follow-up. Look at his X-ray, absolutely clear. No CT scan, no remdesivir, no other drug except dexamethasone and heparin. Nothing else were used. This is another lady, 46 years, admitted on day 10. See the X-ray on day 4, very few shadows. But then she was managing herself at home, but she worsened. She was not she was not doing her diet or whatever. Day 10, she came to me and got admitted. Look at the X-ray. There's hardly any free space here. Both the lungs are completely covered with the pneumonia. I didn't do a CT scan. I didn't give remdesivir. And I didn't admit her in ICU also. This is day 20 on the day of discharge. CRP 1.62, normal. SpO2 97, room air. This is day 37. Both lungs are very clear, right? So that's what I'm saying. In most of the patients, this kind of diet and a very careful management will help almost everybody. So as activists in our groups and all the campaigns that we are conducting, as I showed you, we need to educate our people, stay home if symptomatic, No need for any type of treatment because a lot of people are panicky. They want to take something. No, kuch to dijiye. Nothing will work. Nothing is needed. This point should be told to them very clearly. Monitor particularly the sections that are vulnerable, elderly, and all those, and the dietary restrictions and regular exercise. This is the point which is very specific from my point of view or from our point of view. So please spread this message. Now, regarding how to face the third wave, very simple chart. We all now have to look at those who are infected and recovered. I'll tell you a little later. A lot of people have already got infected and recovered. So we should give them confidence. Look here, you are infected and you are safe. You are not going to get any problem hereafter. Don't worry, forget it. And you can help others. You should come forward and help others because you are safe. You should help others. If somebody is not infected, if they are not vulnerable, that they are not elderly, not obese, younger age group, they need not worry. And those who are vulnerable should be given all the education, how to protect themselves, to prevent the disease, how to identify the symptoms, and how to manage it. I've told you all that if they get it. Now regarding lockdowns, again about lockdowns from last from March 13th when Karnataka decided, I had called it a foolish decision. I had said then that it is not impossible to control this virus at all because it spreads from one person to another so easily. It's not easy to control or not possible to control. I had said then that it has entered India. It is going to be here for centuries to come, and it is impossible to control it. Again, there was a lot of criticism, but now today everybody is saying the same thing, that it is going to stay with us. We can't control it. And Singapore just day before yesterday has announced that we have to now live with COVID, and Singapore is withdrawing all the serious or severe restrictions that they had imposed. And this is what I had written to some of the organizations, that this lockdown, countrywide lockdown, when there are only 500 cases, will not help. It will kill India. That's what I had said. It will kill India. And I'm attaching the guidelines issued by the central government on 4th April, which nowhere mentions about a national or statewide lockdown. This is the guideline published by the government then, which had no word on lockdowns. And All India Institute of Medical, the ICMR had published the paper in its own journal on April 2nd or 3rd, wherein it had very clearly stated that lockdown is a drastic public health measure. While the benefits of such a move remain to be seen, the long-lasting negative impacts of such a measure should not be underplayed. Such measures can lead to social, psychological, economic stresses on the whole population, leading to long-lasting adverse health outcomes. Instead of coercive top-down quarantine approaches, which are driven by the authorities, community and civil society-led self-quarantine and self-monitoring could emerge as more sustainable and implementable strategies for protracted pandemic like COVID. This is written by ICMR, but we didn't heed to their advice also. And this is the reply on RTI, why lockdown was imposed, what was the advice from the experts. So this is a reply. On an appeal made by the Honorable PM, people followed Janata curfew wholeheartedly. So therefore, the state governments imposed lockdowns by invoking Epidemic Disease Act and Disaster Management Act. This is a reply in front of it. And BBC carried this report on 29th March this year, that Indian government did not consult experts before lockdown. So did the lockdowns help? Lockdown benefit, the arguments that are being put out is only intuitive. We had a discussion very recently with the Karnataka so-called expert committee. The chairperson said it is a Brahmastra, and another prominent member said it doesn't work. So within the committee, there is so much of confusion. So one size fits all approach, top-down approach doesn't work, cannot work. Most of these lockdowns were imposed based on mathematical predictions, which underestimated voluntary human behavior. It is as though the government and these experts trying to control human beings. They don't listen to us. They don't take our advice. So they need to be controlled. So it is these control freaks who imposed lockdowns all over the country and in some parts of the world. After 1 year, cumulative deaths per million and the pattern of daily deaths per million is not negatively correlated with the stringency of lockdown across the countries. That means it has neither affected the mortality nor affected daily deaths. And so it didn't work basically. Many countries did not lock down, and some of them which did not repeat it later. Now, this is another paper. Conclusion indicate that 15 days after the lockdown, daily cases may come down, but eventually there is no significant decline in the prevalence of the disease or mortality. Now, it cannot work because for the simple reason, COVID, as I told you, spreads from person to person. This is the study from Andhra Pradesh and from Telangana and Tamil Nadu, done by Ramanan Lakshminarayan's team, published in journal Science last November. Overall mortality, overall transmission is 10.7% for high risk contacts and 4.7 for low risk. 1.2% risk of spread in healthcare settings because we doctors are wearing masks and other things all along. 2.6% in the community and 9% in the household. That means the risk of spread within the household, person to person, is 4 times that of chance of spread in the community. And what did we do? We locked down, shut down the communities, and we did not educate people about physical distancing and other measures to be taken inside their household to prevent transmission. That's why we have had explosion of COVID in this in our country, much more than any other parts of the world. So, in the name of locking down, in the name of controlling the disease, can everything that we have be taken away? Public health measures may limit the may limit the scope of rights and liberties only if evidently and demonstrably they are effective at achieving their aim. There should be evidence that these things will help. Is there evidence? The answer is no. How the purported benefits of these measures must far outweigh the foreseeable harms. ICMR itself said harms are likely to be more than the benefits, but we did lockdown. And clearly, uniformly, transparently, and publicly, all these factors should be communicated to the public. Was it done? No. So, lockdown measures have forced individuals to suspend their liberty in order to protect others from harms. But those who suspended their liberty themselves got harmed from the disease and from the lockdowns. So ultimately, the benefits definitely did not outweigh the risks of lockdown. Now, how did we lock down? Based on Epidemic Disease Act. And why did this law come in the first place? To control plague. And plague in 1897 would kill 35 to 40% people got infected because there are no antibiotics, nothing was available there. So people died. So the only measure was probably controlling the transmission. So this was brought in. But then it mentioned any dangerous epidemic disease. 1897, dangerous disease. We are using that law to control COVID, which the mortality is 0.07%. Plague killed 35 per 100 and COVID killed 7 per 10,000. This was known last April itself, 2020, when John Ioannidis and other top level scientists of the world epidemiology said that it is likely to be 0.05 to 0.5%, not more than that. But we considered COVID as a dangerous disease comparable to plague and lockdown. And this very Epidemic Disease Act says prescribe temporary regulations. What is this temporary? We have lockdown for months together now. And during second wave, Karnataka lockdown for again 2 months. And even now it is a partial unlocking. So what is temporary? It's a mockery of this law. And a lot of people say WHO has recommended. No, WHO never recommended lockdown anywhere. In fact, WHO said these measures can have a profound negative impact on individuals, communities, and societies by bringing social and economic life to a near stop. So therefore, it should be done very carefully. And this is what we all know. Unemployment has gone up by crores, job crisis like no other, and poverty increased by how many? 23, 24% or even more. And worst has been, the worst sufferers have been women and children. School closures, education taken away for 1 year or more than 1 year. Even now in Karnataka, the government is not taking any decision, either this way or that way. Right? And this is a study done in Denmark, of all places, one of the best countries in the world. We find that students made little or no progress while learning from home. Learning loss was most pronounced among students from disadvantaged homes. In India, even otherwise, the standards of education have fallen to such depths that students in 8th standards do not have the skills of 2nd or 3rd standard when it comes to mathematics and languages. And by shutting down schools for 1 year now, yesterday I had a girl who came with pain abdomen. I was asking her the history of her menstruation. You wouldn't believe this. I was shocked and saddened so much that she couldn't name the months of the year. She said, when did you last have this? She said, September. I said, September is almost 9 months ago. No, it was last month. I said, which month? Then she says, March. She has come, and she is studying in 9th standard. Mental health of children affected. 247 million children in India are impacted by everything, including malnutrition. So therefore, it is time all of us get our act together and force these governments everywhere from Kerala. I mentioned Kerala also in this. From Kerala to Kashmir, from Gujarat to Assam or wherever, all schools should be opened immediately. So what should be our approach to lockdowns? I suggest that we should demand the suspension of EDA and DMA immediately. Enough is enough. COVID doesn't deserve these acts to be imposed. No more lockdowns in the name of 3rd, 4th wave, Delta plus, etc. Already Karnataka government has been instructed to stringently lock down Mysore district because some Delta plus has been found. It is not different from whatever plus or minus we have had so far. And then cash compensation for each and everyone who has lost livelihood, business or employment income. It is only in our country that lockdowns were imposed and nothing was given to people, as against the rest of the world, where for the duration of the lockdown, people were adequately compensated. Here we were all made Atmanirbhar. And how do we respond to the new narratives? Now I'll be going very quick now. Variants are very common. So this Delta plus doesn't mean anything. SARS-CoV-2 has 30,000 base RNA. It is like a book with say 30,000 base, about 100, 150 or 200 pages book. Okay. And so many words in that book, 30,000 words, each word with 4 letters, 1 letter getting changed. That is a variation. And every month, 2 or 3 such single letter mutations happen in COVID. It is actually much less common than in influenza or HIV, where these changes are much more common than COVID. So what are we talking about? It is changing here, changing there. Yes, it is changing, but it is common. So in the last 1.5 years, we would have had thousands or lakhs of variants. We have detected some, we have not detected many. See, it's like this. This is the whole genome. What changes happen are here, 1 dot here, 1 dot here, 1 dot here. So we have classified them as variants of concern. Of the lakhs or thousands, I said, only 4 have been labeled as variants of concern: alpha, beta, gamma, delta. And now in India, we have added Delta plus. But look here, it may increase transmission, but immunity escape, only 2. That too may or may not. Severity 3, not Delta. Right? So we don't know much about this. We are only creating hype without much evidence. These are variants of interest. They are not variants of concern. Right? One from India listed. May do something, may not do something. So these are things that should be left to the geneticists who are interested in doing sequencing. It has nothing, no relevance to common people, no relevance to disease management. When I see a patient of COVID, I am interested to know whether that patient has severe likelihood of getting complication or not, and if he has complication, how to manage. I am not bothered whether it is Delta, Alpha, Beta, Gamma. Ultimately, it is the same. And in India, almost all variants are spreading equally. That's what this graph shows. Again here, 28% Delta, and then 117 is 13%, and these are the other variants. So what is the big hue and cry about? And CDC has listed, just named possible high consequence. I'm showing this because there is none. Not one is of high consequence. Now, central government has given an affidavit, submitted an affidavit in the Supreme Court of India, No global scientific evidence that virus targets particular age group. The possibility of a resurgent COVID-19 infection is speculative and will depend on the behavior of, okay, anyway, we have to blame the citizens. That's okay. But by this affidavit in the Supreme Court of India, central government has told very clearly, third wave is speculative. We don't know whether it's coming or not coming, and that it can affect children is again absolutely baseless. This is what the central government has told the Supreme Court. And I'm showing this deliberately. This is published in the most reputed, The Hindu. He says Delta plus can cause another wave if vaccination is delayed. And then he goes on to say the efficacy against the Delta plus wave, efficacy of the vaccine. The headline blurb is that only vaccine can prevent Delta plus. And then he says efficacy against the Delta plus variant is not known. It is intuitive that the Delta plus variant can trigger another surge in India, especially if the complete course of the vaccine uptake is delayed. Sir, you are saying it is not known whether the vaccine is affecting or not, whether Delta plus is causing this or not. You have no answers. Yet you say that vaccination is a must, will protect. How? And these are the experts from Karnataka. They made all these calculations. This is the report they submitted a week ago. And they said that the total number of cases in Karnataka may be anywhere from 20 to 40 times of the actual number of cases based on their own published papers. I won't go into the details because it will take a lot of time. And if you multiply by 20, 30, 40, total cases we have had about 3 days ago were 28 lakh 30,000. You multiply by 20, it comes to 5 lakh 66, 5 crore 66. 30, it comes to 8 crore 49 lakhs. By 40, it comes to 11 crores. Population of Karnataka is 7 crores. So the expert committee says 30 to 40 times more may be infected compared to the, when you consider the actual number of cases reported. So that means, according to the committee, each and everybody in Karnataka is already infected. So where is the question of third wave? So then the committee goes on to say that during the peak of second wave, there were 15 lakh people infected on a single day, on the peak day of 50,000. They multiply it by 30, comes to 15 lakhs. So this comes to 2.16% of the total population. Now they go on to say percentage of top population infected in third wave peak extrapolated second wave is 2%. How is that? When you are saying that everybody in Karnataka is already infected, who is left to be infected for the third wave? How can you have 15 lakh people getting infected in the third wave? This is the expert comment. So the question is, how can the third wave be very similar to the second wave? So this question, when I raised, was posed by a journalist to the expert committee. Then you know the answer. Third wave is going to be similar to first and second wave because we have another 6 crore people who have not gotten vaccinated. And most importantly, antibodies from natural infection wear off in most by the end of 3 months. So even if a person has got infection and recovered in the second wave, it doesn't give him immunity from the third wave. How, sir? On what basis? Now you tell us, if that is the case, you should tell us 18 lakhs infected during first wave as compared to 10 lakhs in the second wave, as compared to 10 lakh in the second wave. How many of these 18 lakhs had infection during the first wave? I'm sure not one. So reinfections do not happen at all. So how is this expert committee or the so-called expert saying that immunity will go off in 3 months, everybody is at risk of infection again? So what is the basis of your claim that 1 crore only are immune and 6 crore are not? And how are you saying that natural infection can't protect beyond 3 months or 6 months? And then how can the vaccine do? If natural infection doesn't give immunity, how can a vaccine give immunity? Because with the vaccine, after all, you are giving only small portion of the vaccine in the virus in a small dose. With a natural infection, I am getting the full dose of the virus and it is multiplying and it is a full-blown infection. Now, they go on to calculate that 3 lakh children will get infected during the third wave. How? During the first and second wave, this is the data of the first wave. The infection among children, you can see here, was very, very less. They make 34% of the population, and total infection in people less than 20 years was 11%. No, sorry, 6.8, about 9%. Deaths among total deaths, this is the data of March this year. After that, they have not published. 12,300 deaths, out of which total deaths less than 20 years, 0.6%. Okay. And the case fatality rate, this is from official data, of less than 30 years is 0.1% compared to the elders. Now, if you take the total infection, this will come down to 0.0001%. So therefore, none of these new narratives are based on facts. It is probably done with some agenda by these so-called experts. So what should be our response? Immediate initiation of sero surveys among the unvaccinated PCR unconfirmed population. How can the government identify? You have tagged vaccination and you have tagged RT-PCR with Aadhaar card. So it is not very difficult for the government to find out who is infected with the RT-PCR and who has been vaccinated. The rest of the population, don't use Aadhaar, but do a sero survey, find out among the uninfected, unvaccinated, how many are infected. Make the policy based on such scientific evidence. Restrain all these people. Niti Aayog officers, like I can name him, Dr. V.K. Paul, every day he says something or the other which is not based on evidence. And other officials and so-called committee members and experts from fear mongering and issuing unscientific and baseless statements. This should be asked for. Lastly, what should be our position on vaccination? There are different types of COVID vaccine. Today's report is that even one mRNA vaccine has been allowed in this country. I am worried because we are changing the laws to suit vaccines like no other. We have given emergency use authorizations. We are buying a product, but the government is buying a product for which it has not given permission to sell. None of these have been given permits to sell in the market, but the government is buying. And now, nowhere in the past, a drug that has been tested in a foreign country was allowed in India to be used without trials here. So we are now allowing this vaccine to be used in India without any trials in India. So then there is, of course, talk about COVID-19 passport, COVID-19 vaccination card and whatnot. So who needs the vaccine really? Everybody who is infected is immune. India is a different country compared to the US, UK and Europe and Australia. There the population infected may be about 10 to 12%. In India, 60 to 70% are already infected. I'm going to show you a little later. Those who are infected have robust immunity against the virus. This is now a proven fact. Every day there are papers tumbling out of our journals. So I'm just showing the headlines. This is unpublished in the most reputed journals. Indicate that immunity will be long lasting. Immunity in convalescent individuals will be very long lasting. And this is the latest published yesterday, that those who are already infected have such beautiful immunity, such great immunity, that with one shot of mRNA vaccine, they get 4 times more antibody response compared to the unvaccinated population. And those who are infected don't get infected again. These are the two beautiful studies done in the UK among the staff nurses and among the care homes. Vivaldi and Siren both show that reinfections do not happen. Even if they happen, they are very mild or could be due to some other maybe false positive, etc., etc. Now, this is another wonderful study reported from Cleveland Health System. Conclusion: individuals who have had SARS-CoV-2 infection are unlikely to benefit from COVID-19 vaccination, and vaccines can be safely prioritized to those who have not been infected before. Cumulative incidence of COVID-19 in 52,238 employees. COVID-19 did not occur in anyone over the 5 months of the study among the 2,579 previously infected with COVID-19, including 1,359 who did not take the vaccine. So if you take the vaccine, don't take the vaccine. If you have already infected, you won't get infected again. So there is no need for vaccine for those who are already infected, which forms 60 to 70% of India's population. I'm not saying this. This is the Zero survey. 50% of children are infected already in Mumbai and Delhi, where the studies have been done. So I said infection in children is lesser than in adults. So if 50% children are seropositive, 60 to 70% of adults are certainly seropositive in India. And the government and its panel have themselves very clearly said COVID recovered should take the vaccine after 6 months. Why 6 months? Come out and open and say you don't have to take the vaccine. Don't try to show that we are doing the world's largest vaccination drive. Let it be the world's most intelligent and the best vaccination drive. Not the numbers, let the quality. So when in India, 60 to 70% are already infected and immune, let us not waste money, waste resources in vaccinating them. Then now attempts are being made for mandatorily vaccinating. This is from screenshot from government's own website, Ministry of Health and Family Welfare. Is it mandatory to take the vaccine? The government itself is asking the question, answering the question. Vaccination for COVID-19 is voluntary. Again, another PDF file. Vaccination for COVID-19 is voluntary. Central government. And these are the two orders based on the government's position from Gujarat High Court, Allahabad High Court, with regard to a writ filed by an IAS officer, IF officer, that no coercive action shall be taken. This is Meghalaya High Court. No, it should be only a persuasive advisor and not as a coercion. And our own Minister of Health, Dr. Harshavardhan, before the G7 leaders stated that it is highly discriminatory to have a vaccine passport. Sir, you may make that statement before G7. Why don't you make the statement here inside the country so that vaccine passports and mandatory vaccinations are not asked for in schools and colleges and universities and by all the employers as it is happening today. And then there are other points about questions about safety of these vaccines. I won't go into the details, but this very interesting chart very clearly shows that in the younger population, less than 50 years, the benefits of vaccine are far lesser than the possible side effects. So in the elderly, of course, as I said, they have more risk of getting complications. So they may stand to gain a bit with vaccination. But the younger ones who have absolutely no problem, I said the mortality in less than 30 is 0.0001%. That too not due to COVID. COVID is just incidental. So why vaccinate them? And it is already proven that they don't spread the disease to their elders or other members or the teachers. Australia won't administer AstraZeneca vaccine to young people. Italy will not, Canada will not, and UK will not. So why are we? This is what our minister said. Offline classes scheduled for Karnataka colleges only after first dose vaccine. Why, sir? That's why we have issued a legal notice to the Karnataka government. Central government says vaccine is not mandatory. It is voluntary. The courts are saying it cannot be a coercive action. But you are saying without vaccination, you are not going to open the colleges. So 2 or 3 people with some power in their, with some authority, very unfortunate that they are deciding the future of 2 crore children of Karnataka. Now, our own Indian Medical Association joined this bandwagon in April when the IMA suggested that ration PDS should be stopped for those who are not getting vaccinated. And some officers also issued such orders. Right? Show vaccination certificate, get ration under PDS. And then Harshavardhan says, no one can be forced to take COVID-19 in response to this. And this is in my district. RTP, without RT-PCR, you cannot enter the district. ICMR, on the contrary, has made it very clear in its testing policy released that no travel restrictions should be imposed and nobody should be asked for RT-PCR test for traveling interstate. And Karnataka government itself has given an undertaking affidavit in the Karnataka High Court that no curbs on Karnataka-Kerala border travel. ICMR says no restriction possible, no RT-PCR needed. Karnataka government writes to the High Court and submits before the High Court that it won't do any such border restriction. And just day before yesterday, in our district, restrictions are imposed. So I hope we are understanding what is happening in this country. Supreme Court is saying something, nobody takes it. High Court is saying something, and the government itself is saying something before the High Court, but the Deputy Commissioner doesn't follow it. ICMR is saying something, the officers don't want to follow it. So it is like, what do we call it? Anarchy, lawlessness. Everybody has become an authority. So what should be our position? Those already infected need not and should not be given the emergency use authorization vaccines. Children and unstudied populations where studies on vaccines have not been done should not be given the vaccines unless the trials are over. Moderna has not been studied in India, so I have my own reservations about giving it to Indian people. Among the uninfected, only the vulnerable should be offered the vaccine, not coerced with the vaccine, only voluntary. It should not be linked to any benefits, education, entry, travel, employment, etc. And this, as Comrade Amarjit Kaur mentioned, good news from the Supreme Court. If you are using Disaster Management Act to lock down and impose restrictions, please use the same Disaster Management Act to give compensation to all the victims. So I end here with the request to everybody that we should end the what is called as the Corona terrorism. Thank you very much for your patient listening, and we'll now continue with the. So I think I took a lot of time, but I'm sure it was, at least for me, it was worth the effort. Thank you very much.